Well, hello, insiders. It's a bright new year, and today's topic would be the much awaited Met Gala 2026's theme, costume art. Alright, so far what we know about the Met Gala 2026 is that it would take place on the 4th of May 2026 and be hosted by a numerous number of celebrities such as Beyonce, who's back on the Met, Nicole Kidman, Venus Williams, Misty Copeland, Sabrina Carpenter, Doja Cat, Gwendolyn Christie, Alex Consani, Elizabeth Debicki, Paloma Ezra, Lisa, Sam Smith, Tiana Taylor, Aja Wilson, and also including Vogue's head of editorial content, the new Chloe Mao. And the committee being led by Anthony, I actually don't know how to spell his surname, Vaccarello, and Zoe Kravitz. Alright, but what's more interesting about this year's Met Gala is the theme itself, costume art. Now about costume art, well, according to Google, it is the intersection where clothing transcends mere function to become a visual art form, telling stories, defining characters, or exploring society seen in theatrical design for narrative depth, historical context, or fantasy, and as fine art in museum exhibitions that link garments with artworks to show fashion as a cultural expression of the dressed body. In short, it is about designing or curating clothes to communicate ideas, personality, time period, or even abstract concepts rather than just dressing someone. In my opinion, this Met Gala will be a playground where art, politics, and fashion would be able to mingle harmoniously to create global statements. For 2026, what the Met is trying to communicate to be fashion is art. But is fashion exactly art? According to Max Holland, the CEO and director of the Met, the show will examine themes on the dressed body and will be organized thematically by different body types. According to Andrew Bolton, the curator in charge. But now, let's focus on what costume art really communicates, its significance in the past, and what effects it will have for today's modern world. When one thinks of the word costume, what exactly comes to mind are the gorgeous outfits, vibrant outfits you imagine, which is taken place in theater. The different costumes an actor and actress wears when portraying a specific character from a specific time, and what the subcast would also wear and portray, like the backgrounds, the ambience when it comes to costume, to make sure that it communicates effectively in terms of the drama or the poem which they are playing. In retrospect, the historical evolution of costume spans thousands of years, showcasing how clothing reflects cultural shifts, artistic trends, political beliefs and it shows an evolution of what these civilizations, such as the Greeks, the Romans, medieval times, the Renaissance era, Belle Epoque era, and what all these former societies have gone through. It is evident that the roots of costume design are deeply intertwined with the innovative spirit of ancient Greece. Why? Well, they were the first to introduce theater to the whole world, and in terms of their clothing, you see how simple it is with their simple chitons and their togas, and which actually helps the audience to understand the characters on stage, and with their use of masks to symbolize comedy, tragedy, to symbolize the emotion of each character they are playing in. And those costumes were all about clarity and purpose in terms of the character they are playing. And plus, with the Renaissance era being a transformative era for stage costumes, blending classical antiquity and with a high influx of European fashion. It's fascinating that this era is actually, the inspiration was borrowed from Greek traditions, but reinvented with a distinct Renaissance flair. For example, Shakespeare's plays often featured actors in Roman togas as a respect for ancient styles, or seamlessly incorporating the rich textures, vibrant colors of Elizabethan England, with bold, rich borders, intricate designs, which represent status and nobility, were much more notable in this Renaissance era, as well as geometric patterns becoming the scene stealers of the show. They were actually blending classical styles with contemporary fashion to create visually stunning pieces. And also with the Belle Epoque, they focused more on historically accurate costumes to reflect the period which these plays were represented in. However, now we can see with the modern era, the modern dialogue is actually communicated with the cast wearing historical costumes, and sometimes while the cast wears modern clothes like a jeans or a top, they communicate in historic dialogue. This mixing of traditional and contemporary style makes history exciting, and it's a comedic twist to what the writer and the director have in mind in order to keep the audience engaged. And you see a lot of this on West End, on Broadway, where one sees even the contemporary music such as rap, hip hop embedded into these plays in order to communicate that contemporary significance. While most people actually believe that costume art comes mostly from the European side of history, but there's much more to be found in terms of the Asian side. Asian costumes, same as European, are also used to communicate religious stories, rituals and theatric dramas in terms of their elaborate costumes, hand movement, gestures, and highly influenced, and have to tell that Asian costumes are highly influenced by political beliefs. For example, Bharatanatyam in India, where the dancers wear traditional attire with their heads and toes adorned from jewelry, while they communicate the story in terms of their hand gestures, their mudras, for example, and also facial expressions. Although they communicate a simple story, their movements and gestures are very complex, and it takes a skilled person who's very embedded in terms of these cultural arts to figure out. For example, historical clothing reflecting social status, such as in Bhutan, the Gho and Kira aren't just style. They showcase regional identity and societal roles. And when you see someone in these outfits, you can learn a lot about their heritage, their place in society. And in terms of China, the Hanfu and Qipao highlight the country's love for detail and tradition. The Hanfu, characterized by the flowing robes, reflect Confucian ideals, while the Qipao is a modern icon of sophistication. And also the Japanese kimono and yukata, being masterpieces of craftsmanship, are designs which actually mirror nature and the changing of the seasons, while also being symbols for elegance, cultural identity, and also they are widely worn during festivals and ceremonies. And in terms of Sri Lanka, for the costumes, you have the devil dancing rituals, where masks are incorporated to represent the 18 diseases, numerous devil faces such as the Girula Raksha, Nagaraksha, in order to repel the demon or entity from a possessed person. And also Sri Lankan dancing, such as the Kandyan dance, who wear the Ves costume with sturdy headdresses, intricate breastplates, rhythmically moving to the beat of the dance. And also for the female dancers, blouses adorned with gold embroidery hues of black and red to symbolize the earth, roots of ancestry, and the skirts with the pleats of white frills moving gracefully with the vannam. Plus the Thelme dancers of the south, with the white turban headdresses and elaborate jackets and tights which are colorful and intricate with borders, and the dance representing healing and prosperity. And not just the dance costumes of Sri Lanka, there's also the influence of the colonial clothing, which also have been evolved over time. So as you can see from all these examples, the essence of traditional Asian costumes, they're not just mere garments, they're symbols of identity, storytelling mediums, and expressions of a region's unique heritage. And obviously across Asia and across the European continents, America, Africa, clothings are influenced by climate, geography, religion, and social hierarchy, which showcases a tapestry of variety. And the key points of significance include cultural preservation, which helps to maintain a link to the community's past, ceremonial importance, often for weddings, festivals, religious rituals, spiritual rituals, and symbolism plus artistry, because each design element in each of the garment, from the hemlines, from embroidery to the cut of the clothing, it carries meaning. And not just the garment itself, the different headdresses, the way in order to represent a victory, a different social status, and also different beads which symbolizes each aspect of their tribe. Plus, for example, the Native Americans, their headdresses for the chiefs, for the warriors. But there's one thing to note about the Met Gala. All what we have seen before in the past years, well, aren't they all costumes as well? Because this theme is basically, in my opinion, a summarization of what has happened in the past few years, and it is trying to bring together all these elements they have explored in the past into one central ground to portray in this high-end world of fashion. And as pros and cons, well, we've gone through the pros, which are the basics in terms of storytelling, creativity, uniqueness, social and emotional growth. And it's also artistic fulfillment, because creativity is trying to meet in the sense of dressing practicality. However, you have to, like, everybody has to know that these costumes, it's just going to be worn once and then not used in any other days, and it's impractical because there's a huge financial budget which will be allocated for all the designers and all the brands who are taking part in this in order to design for the invitees, and the time taken to curate these costumes is immense. It'll take a year, more than 6 months, once the theme was given. And it's, well, costumes are not practical, and most of them are not durable, as these are professionally made, and sometimes costumes are just made in order to keep it as a form of a gala viewing. But however, the question arises, how will the 2026 Met Gala interpret costume art into creating global power statements to represent what the Museum of Metropolitan Art wants to convey in this theme? According to Andrew Bolton, and as we previously discussed before, the show is to examine themes on the dressed body and to be organized thematically by different body types. So this is what will be showcased in the museum. However, according to recent sources, there's no particular dress code which has been confirmed yet by the committee. Now the question will arise, how will the attendees and the designers who are designing for them will cater to their own types of interpretation of costumes, whether it be political representation or whether it be a historical representation, or a costume which can represent the marginalized communities. So there are these different themes which each celebrity, invitee can represent in terms of their identity, in terms of their experience. However, with the last year's Met Gala and everybody criticizing this as the rise of the Hunger Games, I think the general public and people who are fashion enthusiasts will take this on in a very indifferent attitude. And this theme is a powerful theme, and we saw it last year with last year's theme, which was superfine tailoring to black style, which celebrated the history of black dandyism and the significance of tailored fashion in black culture. Well, there were really good designs. However, there were some which were very marginalizing and which were very plain when it comes to tailoring, because tailoring can do wonders in terms of fashion, but there were some who understood the assignment and there were some who didn't. And not to take this pessimistically, but I believe this year, hopefully, that most of them would be able to understand the assignment in terms of costume art. And there rises the question, is art equally fashion, or is fashion actually related to art? Well, when it comes to the general consensus, fashion is widely considered a form of art due to its creative process, cultural significance, and the ability to express identity and emotion through clothing. Designers, much like traditional artists, engage in a creative process that involves conceptualizing ideas and also selecting materials, crafting garments which relate to the concept, and to convey that concept in a very contemporary plus radical format. And it's a process which mirrors painters, sculptures, plus where aesthetics form and composition, especially for example avant-garde, haute couture, because throughout history fashion has exactly been influenced by various art movements. Designers like Elsa Schiaparelli, she was a heavy collaborator with Salvador Dali, creating pieces which were much as about art as they were about clothing, because her designs were very much embedded with surrealism. Whereas other perspectives on fashion as art, from the designer Karl Lagerfeld, stated art is art and fashion is fashion. Although he drew instinction from various artistic sources throughout his career, he highlights the permeability between categories, such as fashion can embody artistic qualities, but it's not necessarily art, because we can see that fashion diversifies. And fashion can be interpreted in many ways. It can be worn in many ways, styled in many ways, whereas in terms of art, such as a sculpture or painting, it can be interpreted differently. However, it is not as versatile as fashion. So this theme will predominantly see, in my opinion, of how the designers are able to distinguish costume art into fashion. We'll be able to see different pieces expressing different political economic situations, such as the Ukraine-Russian war, and now we have the US bombing on Venezuela, the Gaza war, and also in terms of marginalized communities, cultural appropriation, how will these themes be communicated into costume art? And also designers will take historical context, such as the ancient theater and ancient civilizations, also religious and ceremonial systems such as the Day of the Dead in Mexico, and also healing rituals from Asia, the Chinese, mask dancing, and also cultural references of India. If someone is to style Simone Ashley, if she's being invited to the Met Gala, how will she will dancing in terms of the festivals, in terms of Deepavali, how will that be communicated into costume art for the Met? So there's a lot of food for thought in terms of costume art. And how will these themes, whatever theme which anyone is trying to portray, be dressed on the body? And in terms of thematics, how will that affect society as a whole, and especially for the year of 2026, where not everybody will be chronically online and they would try to distance themselves with the ultra-rich hierarchy and try to focus on what actually is affecting society. So there you have it. This is the insider's insight in terms of costume art. And I have to say that I myself am excited for Met Gala. And we will have a small expose after how that turns out to be in order to deep dive and see the meanings behind whatever is communicated in the later dates. So for everybody who listened in, stay safe and hope you have a great day. Cheers.